Vanny captures Gregory, gets the Mimic 1 program inside of his mind, locks him in the silo until he forms the adequate personality, lets him out, and he stays in the daycare loft. That's why the sticky notes carry over in both areas. The sticky notes are Dr. Rabbit trying to communicate with itself and develop its personality. There you go.
Ladies, gentlemen, and those with the good sense to do away with the whole notion, I welcome you to the premier audio medium for all your Fazbear entertainment needs. The Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast. Note, FFPP is not responsible for any loss of appetite, disinterest, dismemberment, or other legally classified statuses. So strap in and enjoy.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast. I'm your host of the Toast, Ryan Toast, here to talk about Five Nights at Freddy's, like we always do. Now, like I've been saying for the past 2 episodes, Secret of the Mimic is ever approaching. As of recording this, it comes out in about 5 nights, but as of release, it comes out in like 2 days. Secret of the Mimic comes out at 1 p.m. on Friday. Actually, no. I've been saying it comes out on 1 p.m. this whole time, but recently, the PlayStation Store updated the time frame to be noon. So as far as I'm aware, Secret of the Mimic will come out at noon EST, 12 p.m. EST on Friday. So I'm planning to start the stream at noon, unless the game gets released earlier. If it's still being released at 1, I'll still start the stream at noon. Maybe we'll play Mario Kart or something in the meanwhile. I don't know. But that stream will start at noon. And I will try to release my video of Watch Before You Play the Game at noon or whenever the game comes out. We're going to release it at the same time. Like I've been saying, usually whenever a FNAF game comes out, I try to get a here's all the lore of this game video out as soon as possible. Typically it comes out on Saturday because the past few FNAF games came out on Thursday. Like Ruin came out, I'm pretty sure, on a Thursday. Help Wanted 2, I think, came out on a Tuesday, if I remember correctly. So I was able to get them out on Friday. This one's coming out on Friday at noon. So obviously it's going to be, and it's a long game. So like I'm assuming I'm not going to finish it until early Saturday morning at the earliest. And I'm not confident that I'll be able to make a full video by Saturday at 2. Probably come out around Sunday. So to fill that little gap, maybe on Thursday, I don't know what the best time frame to release, probably on Friday to keep that consistent schedule. I'm going to release either Thursday or Friday a video of, hey, if you haven't, like before you play Secret of the Mimic, watch this. Here's all the lore you need to know. Here's everything going into this game that's going to give you the context to fully understand what you're about to play. I figured that's the most helpful and preemptive video I can make for a game release like this, so that way my video, when it comes out on the game, if it comes out Sunday or Monday, there's not this big gap in the channel, and there's something there. So you're getting 2 videos this weekend. Be grateful. That's crazy. And of course, we'll be live streaming the game, like you said, the second it comes out. That being said, like I've been saying on these podcasts, we're in the lead up, right? It's coming out. We can't really talk about the game yet. We can talk about some teasers we've gotten since then, but I already did most of that in last week's video. The only 2 teasers not in that video came out at the same time, where we got the Mycelium Men Edwin commercial, which just kind of, again, tripled down on these things being the Mimic, Mycelium Men repeating speech, and FNAF actually had a live stream where Steelwool sent him a box. Hey, Steelwool, if you're watching, feel free to send me anything you want. But it was actually really cool. It had a lot of merchandise about Secret of the Mimic, some renders we've never seen before, and the most interesting thing, and John pointed this out in the live stream, this is Secret of the Mimic marketing. There is a FNAF 3 styled bobblehead of Spring Bonnie. Now, I've been saying for a while, if Murray's Costume Manor's whole thing was building costumes, what if we see an order form or even an early draft of the springlock suits, Fredbear and Spring Bonnie? I've been saying this, and I think this is confirmation, or at least a light teaser, that we might be seeing that. After all, we all kind of assumed that William made the springlocks because they seem really rudimentary for Henry to make them, but we really had no evidence that William did make them. So the idea that somebody else made them is totally plausible, you know? Especially since the only animatronics that seemingly we have evidence that he did make were the Fun Times, which are very different from the Springlocks. So, you know, it's totally possible. And we'll get into that in some of the questions that I pulled up. But because there's not much we can talk about the game because it's not out yet, I've been trying to answer as many questions as possible in the lead up, because I assume after the game comes out, we're pretty much just going to be talking about Secret of the Mimic for the next several months. So now's a good time to round up other questions and try to get through the backlog of emails that I have. So without further ado, let's answer some questions. If you have questions or theories you want talked about on the podcast, feel free to send them into Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast at gmail.com. That link is in the description and copy and paste because it's a pain to type out. Our first question comes from Michael, him. Sorry if this is a long one, but I've been noticing that throughout the MCM archive videos that there have been examples of machines other than the Mimic having Mimic 1 programming. I was wondering if between this and the Mimic Monday images, which seem to imply there were other people working at the Costume Manor, if there's a chance that whoever took over MCM after Edwin may have put the Mimic 1 programming into other animatronics as a way to streamline coding. Furthermore, could this mean that other animatronic characters, such as Jackie or Dolly, aren't warned by the Mimic, but are violent because they share its programming? Thank you for your question. It's completely valid, and that kind of answers the timeline question that we've been having. Because one of the issues with all of these MCM commercials is if Edwin made them, this is against the books. In the books, Edwin was like, I can use this Mimic 1 program to make money, and he had that thought after making it for his son, but he never got to capitalize on that because by the end of the story, he's MIA, and Fazbear reclaims the Mimic, presumably it's programming as well. However, you bring up a good point that a lot of this MCM paperwork seems to be Fazbear coded, right? The whole vacation request that your own wedding doesn't count as a valid reason, or the whole employees getting hurt all the time. That idea makes a lot of sense if Fazbear took over the company post Edwin leaving. And then, to your point, that would explain all these Murray Co. inventions being Mimic 1 programmed. The idea that they just took Murray's inventions, put the Mimic 1 program, called it a product, called it a day. This would allow it to fit in the timeline, because this would be after Edwin already left, something that there's a gap of information we have about Edwin. Fazbear would be filling that gap. Totally plausible. I do have one issue with it. That would mean, and it's not really an issue, it's one hesitation. If this is true, then all of the teasers we've been getting for this game would have to take place after the events of the game, which is totally possible. I'm not saying that's not possible, but I kind of assume that some of these Mimic Monday images we're going to see, that we've been seeing, are things that will pop up in game. Actually, wait. Hard counter evidence. Consider the Cleanovac. The Cleanovac was one of the Murray Co. commercials that we saw, and in this theory, Fazbear would have created it. However, in Secret of the Mimic, we've seen the teaser that was in the Doco Charity livestream. We're going to see the Cleanovac in the manor. It's something that is already created. And if it's already created, then Fazbear couldn't have made it, because Secret of the Mimic is Fazbear sending someone to claim the things Edwin was making. So, at this point in the timeline, Fazbear doesn't control the company yet the Cleanovac exists. So I guess that's a hard counter evidence to your theory. I've accidentally disproven it, that these inventions have to be Edwin inventions because Fazbear is actively reclaiming stuff while they already exist. Now, it is technically possible that they were prototypes by Edwin that were then vamped up, made into production, and sold by Fazbear. That is totally possible. But we still don't have evidence in the books that Edwin ever did that. So it's either a schism or it's a weird timeline thing that we're going to learn in-game. And then as far as, furthermore, could this mean other animatronics such as Jackie and Dolly aren't warned by the Mimic but are violent because they share its programming? Dolly, I'll give you, but Jackie, I think, is being warned by the Mimic because we see shots where the eyes are missing of Jackie and you see the Mimic's eyes glowing behind it. So the Mimic does put on Jackie at some point. I assume it's going to be putting on all of these animatronics because they are costumes at the end of the day. Dolly is a bit of a question. We haven't seen that much visualization of Dolly, and Dolly's one of the few robots versus felt suits. So it is possible, but I think it is most likely that the Mimic is wearing these suits. Regardless, you raise good points, and I'm interested to see how they'll develop on Friday. Thank you for your question, though. Our next question comes from RJ, him. Ever since games like Splatoon and ARMS released, I've wondered what it would be like if Nintendo made more games that were their twist on different game genres. With that in mind, what do you think it would be like if Nintendo made their own mascot horror game? There are many directions Nintendo could take the game in, and I was wondering what you would think would be a best-case scenario if such a game were to exist. Since the Switch 2 and Seek of the Mimic are coming out roughly a week apart, it seems like a fun question to ask. Thank you and have a wonderful day. Well, thank you. That is a great question to ask. I have been addicted to my Switch 2 and more directly to Mario Kart World ever since it came out. Obviously, I did like 4 streams of it in 2 days. I'm doing another stream of it probably on Monday, and I'm planning another collab stream like a week or so from now, and I've been playing the hell out of it offline. In fact, I bet you, my dock's right here, I bet you if I take the Switch out of the dock and I open my Switch, wouldn't you know it, it's literally a screenshot from Mario Kart World. I've been so obsessed with this game. I wonder what my playtime is at this point. 30 hours or more. Can I get an exact? Probably not. 30 hours or more for a game that came out last week. I've got a problem. I'm addicted. I'm willing to admit that. The first step of facing an addiction is admitting you have one. Regardless, I'm a huge Nintendo fan. Actually, feels like a pretty good time to talk about this. The second channel, Rituste, it's kind of been a vague gaming channel with no clear direction, and I think I want to focus that content a bit more, but I don't want to focus on one niche, so I'm kind of focusing on 2. A little bit of a YouTube tip. If you're trying to grow a new channel, don't do this. But because I have an established audience here, I think this makes the most sense. I think Rituste is going to kind of, and the streams in general, are going to kind of morph into Nintendo and horror. So expect a lot more Nintendo and horror content. That's kind of where I was leaning anyway, but I think we're going to hard pivot into that. Regardless, back to your question. I think my best case scenario for Nintendo making a mascot horror game is something similar to Finding Frankie, like a platformer styled mascot horror game, where Finding Frankie is a parkour styled mascot horror game. I think that would be my ideal. But I don't know. Nintendo has a good way of coming up with stuff I would never think of, like ARMS, like Splatoon. So I'd be really curious to see what they would do. I would play the hell out of it if it came out. But yeah, I think a platformer would be my platonic ideal. Thank you for your question, though. Our next one comes from Haley, she, her. In one of your videos, you mentioned hearing a theory about Shadow Freddy and RWQ originating from Charlotte and Cassidy. I was wondering if you could elaborate on this theory. Yeah, so I made a full video on this, if I remember. Hey, Rye, remember, put a link to the video right here, and you can watch my full thoughts there. But to give kind of a brief overview and, updated thoughts, because it's been, I think, over a year since I've made that video. The initial theory was the idea that Shadow Freddy and Shadow Bonnie, or RWQ, seem to be these 2 distinct manifestations of agony, right? They visually represent what agony kind of looks like, that kind of Vantablack manifestation. Granted, Shadow Freddy is purple, which needs to be addressed, but I think that is more of a Scott inconsistency. After all, Shadow Freddy mostly appeared before a lot of the agony stuff was nailed down in Fazbear Frights, so, maybe that's just Scott being a little silly. Regardless, I think there are 2 distinct manifestations of agony, and not alone in that. And then a lot of people have been trying to figure out, okay, where does this agony come from? Now, some people would say that they were 2 springlock failures, 1 in each suit, and those adults manifested agony. That's possible. We don't have a lot of evidence for that. We don't have a lot of evidence surrounding these guys in general, so I'm not going to fault that. My preferred thinking was leaning on the idea that Shadow Freddy is Fredbear and Shadow Bonnie is Toy Bonnie, but specifically Bear and Bunny. And it kind of was the idea that Cassidy, as the vengeful spirit in this paradigm, their agony manifests into Shadow Freddy, and Cassidy is always kind of the vengeful spirit, this aggressor, and Shadow Freddy is that spirit where, looking at, if I remember correctly, could be wrong, I believe looking at Shadow Freddy would end your night, or crash your game in some way. And in FNAF 3, Shadow Freddy is trying to bring the animatronics to William to take him out, but it doesn't work. In FNAF World, all of Shadow Freddy's attacks are insta-kills. Like, Shadow Freddy mimics that aggressor nature that Cassidy does. Meanwhile, Charlotte is always this kind of protector spirit in the marionette, helping the kids possess the suits, shepherding them in FNAF World. And then you look at Shadow Bonnie, where in FNAF 3, Shadow Bonnie is participating in the Happiest Day mini games, giving cake to one of the children. Shadow Bonnie is kind of trying to stop somebody from collecting Remnant in FNAF AR, and in FNAF World, all of Shadow Bonnie's attacks are status effects. They are healing. They are the opposite of Shadow Freddy in that way. So my thinking was that Cassidy's agony manifested into Shadow Freddy, and Charlotte's agony manifested into Shadow Bonnie. And the only good reason for Cassidy to her agony to manifest into Shadow Bonnie, Charlotte's agony to manifest into Shadow Bonnie. Actually, I got some help from FNAF on this, and in the novels, Charlotte had a bunny toy that she held very dearly. So that's my best guess. However, do I still believe this? Not really. I'm of two minds. I really like a new theory, and I had been recently thinking about a theory that we're going to touch more into later in this podcast if we get to that question. I heard a theory, I could not tell you who said it, but a lot of people have said it. It's kind of one of those community theories where a lot of people come up with it and it becomes this thing. The idea that Shadow Freddy is the manifestation of the agony of the missing child incident, and Shadow Bonnie is a manifestation of the agony of the dead child incident. So the FNAF 1 killings and the FNAF 2 killings. Well, the OG Freddy's killings and the FNAF 2 killings. And this kind of just lines up with the idea that Shadow Freddy is Golden Freddy, which is, Fredbear, which is the older variants, whereas Shadow Bonnie is specifically Toy Bonnie. And I do like this, and it kind of gives the DCI merit in the overarching lore, whereas it often doesn't. And it makes a lot of sense. It's one of those things that, there's not, a key piece of evidence that convinces me. It just is very logical and does make sense to me. But I've been thinking recently about a new theory. And it goes down to that mural on Murray's Costume Manor. So, first of all, before I forget, Haley, thank you for your question. But I am going to grab a later question, and I'm going to bring it up now. And it's from Argent and y'all. I've heard a little bit of buzz surrounding the MCM mural featuring Fredbear and a blue Bonnie. It stands out, and I think it might have a little tinfoil hat theory on what character may have been, where it, or at least its likeness went. Cards on the table. I think this may be Steelwool throwing us a bone with Mexus. The connections are few, but I think they're there. Anomalous blue bunny characters with heavy ties to the Mimic. Nobody seems to know where they come from or where they went. What are your thoughts? I don't know they'd be so direct with it, but a girl-boy thing can believe. Very question. So it kind of goes back to that, right? And this is where I was trying to connect this. It's always been a weird question that Shadow Freddy is Fredbear, but Shadow Bonnie is Toy Bonnie, a character that's only ever been blue. And there's never been a good reason for that until now we have this mural where Fredbear is being paired up with blue Bonnie. Now, FNAF 1 Bonnie, Freddy's Bonnie is purple, but Toy Bonnie and many other iterations are blue. This kind of goes into a theory that I've been kicking around that we have no evidence for, but I wonder if this is the direction FNAF is going. And that is that these characters are connected to something much older than William or Edwin or Henry. And these characters have accidentally tapped into whatever this connection is. Because when you look at this mural in Murray's Costume Manor, you have Fredbear, you have this blue Bonnie, and you have this traveling caravan, which seems way older than any of this. And then you look at the cards that Mystic Hippo has, and the cards of Mystic Hippo look like a sun and moon face. So now it's a matter of these characters keep getting paired with older and older things. All of them being centered around masks. Masks being something that throughout history, throughout cultures, have always been significant in some way. I wonder if the agony of Fredbear and Bonnie go much before the characters Fredbear and Bonnie were ever created. And I know it's such a crack theory, it's such an out there theory, we have no evidence for it. But I wonder if the inciting incident to a lot of FNAF that we're going to find out, maybe in Secret of the Mimic, maybe in something later, is that William found out about Remnant, about Agony, about all of this from exposure to some sort of connection with these characters. And I wonder if Shadow Freddy and RWQ are manifestations of Agony from a long time back, before Freddy's or Fredbears were ever a thing. And I wonder if that agony has influenced William and Fazbear's. It's a crazy theory. We don't have a lot of evidence for it, but it's something that I think could be genuinely a really interesting angle to take. And, it could explain the weird Fredbear Blue Bonnie mural on the MCM Manor. Because it's something that needs to be addressed. Why is there a mural of a yellow Freddy and a blue Bonnie? That is a Fredbear and at least Toy Bonnie pairing. But thank you for your question, Argent, and thank you for your question, Haley. Our next question comes from Glitchy, they, them. If the Mimic was the one living in the post-it room, why are there notes that say grown-ups only, or why is I? Additionally, game theory supporting evidence for Gregbot and Miss Afton being the head of the table. I want your thoughts on this, since this is why I'm on the fence for Gregory being a human. So, I've always been on the fence about the Mimic being the one in the silo room, because one of the issues with that is that the Mimic is locked in the FNAF 6 basement, and presumably it would have been there before security breach. So why was it in there, brought up to the silo, and then shoved back down there? That seems weird to me. However, that being said, the post-it notes in the silo do make a lot of sense for the Mimic. If the Mimic endoskeleton's last exposure to people was David, Edwin's son, then a lot of this starts to make sense. The idea of grown-ups only. Okay, well, it's being David. Why is I? It's starting to learn that it's not David, right? So I think that's where a lot of that goes to. As far as Gregbot, for me, it's a lack of information. I don't think Gregbot is a... I don't disbelieve Gregbot because, there's clear evidence against Gregory being a robot. I disbelieve Gregbot because I don't see any compelling evidence for Gregory to be a robot. I think he is a convenient child for the Mimic and for Glitchtrap. A convenient child that is close enough to its goals. That's, I think, makes the most sense. And here's the thing. That post-it note room could still be Gregory, without Gregory being a robot. Glitchtrap can iterate itself inside of a human mind. We see it attempt to do it with Jeremy, we see it successfully do it with Vanessa. Unless you're saying Vanessa's a robot too, which we have zero evidence for. But if Vanessa is a human being, which we assume is true, we know Glitchtrap can iterate itself inside of Vanessa's mind. So if a more rudimentary version of the Mimic iterated itself within Gregory's mind, this could be Dr. Rabbit gaining its consciousness and catching up to speed in the silo without Gregory being a robot, if you believe Gregory was in the silo. Which I think makes sense, especially since there are sticky notes in the daycare loft, which I believe is where Dr. Rabbit ends up hanging out, aka, Gregory when he's under the control of Glitchtrap. So if anything, I think the timeline here, and I think I'm just piecing this together now, which I would make a full video on if Secret of the Mimic wasn't coming out in 3 days. So, hey, I might clip this and put this on Twitter. Hear me out. Here's the timeline. Vanny. Let me try to get this into one cohesive clip. Maybe I'll make this maybe this will be the intro. Who knows? But hear me out. Vanny, here's the timeline. Vanny captures Gregory, gets the Mimic 1 program inside of his mind, locks him in the silo until he forms the adequate personality, lets him out, and he stays in the daycare loft. That's why the sticky notes carry over in both areas. The sticky notes are Dr. Rabbit trying to communicate with itself and develop its personality. There you go. That's pretty solid, I fear. But that would be my take, Glitchy. And thank you for your question, because that kind of led me to a revelation I hadn't had before. Our next question comes from Waffle X, they, them. So in your last podcast, you mentioned how you're not sure if Roxy was actually a security node that needed to be deactivated. If you remember in Ruin, the Faz Wrench is placed into Roxy's eye socket. That eye socket is from the mask that we give her in Help Wanted 2. So maybe the mask has more importance than we think. Just wondering, because if it wasn't for that mask, we wouldn't be able to deactivate/reboot her. That's a great point, Waffle X. I had not been a huge fan of the idea that Cassie's dad is the one who modified the Mexis system for a while. I think that was a kind of a first reaction for Ruin, but after Help Wanted 2, I kind of leaned away from it. But now that you mention it, if Roxy really was a security node, we know factually Cassie's dad is the person who put it there. We know from Help Wanted 2 that Cassie's dad put that mask on Roxy, if we're playing as Cassie's dad, which seems all but guaranteed. And if Roxy truly was a security node, then that is direct evidence that he placed at least one security node. And what do we see in the rest of Help Wanted 2 but going all over the Pizzaplex? So maybe Help Wanted 2 does take place before Ruin, possibly during Security Breach, but it's a story of Cassie's dad discovering the Mimic and trying to install the Mexis, or trying to modify the Mexis console, which we know is much older than all of this. It's all the way back in Secret of the Mimic, which we're going to find out hopefully what it stands for in 3 days. I cannot wait. But maybe Hellbonded 2 is the story of Cassie's dad modifying the Mexis machine to try to lock away the Mimic until it eventually takes over his mind. It is possible that, like Jeremy, and maybe that's why we have the Remember Jeremy the achievement, Cassie's dad is like, I know what's happening to me. I know this happened to Jeremy. Maybe he knew Jeremy. I know what's happening to me. It's too late for me, but maybe I can spend the rest of my time to seal this thing away. And it's him placing security nodes throughout the Pizzaplex to lock the Mimic as best as he can. But he ultimately is taken over by the Mimic, and his last moments are seeing the Mimic use his own daughter to undo all of his hard work. What a story if that's the case. And I kind of fuck with that. I do like that a lot, actually. Man, I actually really like that. Yeah, if Roxy truly is a security node, he directly placed that there. No, that's a great point. Thank you for your question, or I guess statement. That's awesome. Our next question comes from Ilana, he, she, they. I'm curious how you think that Sun and Moon animatronic is a very important character, as since Cassie spared their existence and became Eclipse, not to mention how he's very popular along with Music Man, I believe he's a part of the Mimic, but as an endoskeleton, as he shares the same as the Mimic. The theory is that Sun and Moon was there from the beginning through it all, and saw the creation of the Mimic as just a skeleton before becoming Sun and Moon. What are your thoughts on that? Thank you for your question. A couple. I think Sun and Moon is definitely more important than we originally thought. I think game theory was right to point out the similar teeth. And I think, like I mentioned earlier, the Mystic Hippo cards are a reference to Sun and Moon. Not to mention, in the mural that we get with Fredbear and Spring Bonnie, there is a sun and a moon. I think that Sun-Moon character is from this older time period. After all, it kind of looks like a court jester. I made a whole April Fool's short on it years ago that's by far my most viewed short, and I'm still a little mad about that. But it talks about the fact that Sun and Moon is kind of this court jester, and it's never really explained why. They just are. If they are a much older animatronic that's being reused, maybe that's why. So it gets really interesting, especially considering that whole idea of, like, maybe these characters exist before Fazbear. And if so, Sun and Moon makes a lot of sense for a traveling circus, doesn't it? No, it's really interesting. I think Sun and Moon is very important, and I think we have not seen the last of them. I mean, you also mentioned he's very popular. Like Music Man, like Helpy, these are characters that Steelwool and Scott recognized the fans really connected with. So even if they necessarily weren't originally planned to be lore relevant, they definitely are getting sprinkles of lore relevance and will likely appear later down the line, or earlier in the timeline, rather. But thank you for your question. I might need to get some more questions. I'm only at 30 minutes. I got 2 questions left. And most of them have been about the Mimic, because we're all super excited. Our next question comes from Axel. Sir, I had an idea about the Mimic that I would love to get your opinion on. Do you think it's possible that the springlock suits were originally created... I don't know why I added this, Axel. Axel, I don't know why I added this. I'm going to finish reading your question, but I kind of already addressed this. I forgot to bring this up earlier. Do you think it's possible the springlock suits were originally created to be worn by the Mimic, but when Fazbear took possession of Edwin's company, they repurposed them for people? The mechanics of the springlock suits make a lot of sense if they're meant to attach to an adjustable metal endoskeleton rather than being designed with humans in mind. It kind of feels like the cost of savings shortcut that Fazbear might take with the total disregard for the people in the suits. Thank you for your question. I do think Edwin made the springlock suits. I think that's what we're going to find in Secret of the Mimic. However, I don't know if being designed for the Mimic makes sense, because something that we often forget about the springlock suits is it's not that they had an endoskeleton that would be swapped in. The endoskeleton is always in the springlock suit. It's just held to the sides, and it forcefully comes back, and that's what kills people. So it's always in there. So the idea of, like, an animatronic that has an endoskeleton that would make way for a second endoskeleton seems weird to me. But I do think that Edwin made it, and I think we're going to see that on Friday. Fingers crossed. Thank you for your question. Man, I really need more questions because we're only at 30 minutes. But it's also 1 a.m., so I might not. I might just call it. Our last question, maybe, comes from Jaden He-Him. I have a bit of a random question, but something that's been on my mind for a while. Recently, I went and revisited Help Wanted 2, and I just can't seem to understand why Pigpatch is present. Not that there's anything wrong with him, but what is the significance of him being there, and why wasn't it any other mediocre melody? I don't know, just some food for thought. There your question. You raise a great point. Pigpatch was one of the huh things. But something that I think does need to be addressed is Pigpatch, whether intentional or not, has the same eyes as Tiger Rock, blue and green. Which, that feels important, especially in a game that made so many connections to the Mimic and to the past. We see characters like Carney, that seemingly existed a long time ago, not only sharing identical shape and endoskeleton to Lefty, but literally having the same pose in the gallery. Like, this is Steelwool grabbing us by the shoulders and saying, these are the same. But then why is Carney the same as Lefty? What's going on here? Right? It's one of those connections that I don't think we have any evidence that we can directly say this is what it means until maybe Secret of the Mimic or a future game. It's something that the thing that has me the most excited about Secret of the Mimic isn't even necessarily the game itself. It's taking this game and then looking back over Security Breach and Help Wanted 2 and being like, what does this game tell us about these games? And that's what I'm so excited to see how this game fits into this whole cohesive narrative. And it's moments like this that I hope we'll see something explain it a bit in Secret of the Mimic. Why Carney and Lefty are so similar. Why Pigpatch, a mediocre melody, something likely made by Henry, had blue and green eyes. Or are we going to learn now that the mediocre melodies weren't made by Henry, but instead were made by Edwin? Or are we going to... But then it goes to the whole thing about the rock stars, things that were very likely created by Henry having similar designs to Lefty and Carney, things that were they made by Edwin? We have so many questions, and maybe we'll get some answers on Friday, but it's questions like this that I think are really interesting about what we're about to see. Who made what and why? And honestly, like I said, I wanted to make all these videos 45 minutes, but it's 1 a.m. I thought I grabbed enough questions and that I answered every question super quickly. I'm just going to call it here. So like I said, Friday, noon, live stream, and I'm playing Secret of the Mimic until we get every single ending. At the same time, I'm releasing a video. Everything you need to know before playing Secret of the Mimic. Once I beat the game on stream, I will be working tirelessly to make that first initial video. Then after, I will probably do another stream, likely on Monday, going into out-of-bounds stuff and trying to see what we can find in the game itself. I'm going to be very tired come Monday. Yeah. In the meanwhile, I'm excited. I am actually so very excited. It feels like Security Breach again for me. Security Breach was kind of the birth of this channel, where I had been releasing shittily edited gaming content on this channel for a long time to no viewers because I wasn't putting enough effort in. And I had always been a lifelong Freddy's fan, or I guess a franchise-long Freddy's fan. FNAF came out when I was in high school, so obviously. But as long as FNAF has been around, I've been a fan. And when I knew Security Breach was coming out, my plan was on stream, I'll play through every FNAF game and then I'll make a timeline. And, maybe I'll start making scripted content. And that timeline did really well and kind of shocked me into, okay, we're doing scripted content now. And, it took about 7 months to get that energy again and actually juice the channel to where it is now. And the fact that we're getting the next major FNAF game is exciting and terrifying all at once, So I personally can't wait. And I guess I'll see you Friday. Well, if you watch the streams, I'll see you Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, but I'll see you Friday. But until next time, as always, Thank you for watching the Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast, where the pizza abilities are endless. We hope to enjoy your future patronage. Bye-bye for now.